Hey guys, tonight we are living an entire week as a medieval peasant. 7 days, every sunrise, every meal, every back-breaking hour of labor, every moment of genuine fear that the harvest might fail and winter might win. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before the week begins, we need to establish something important. When most people imagine medieval peasants, they picture miserable figures, trudging through mud, beneath gray skies, perpetually starving, perpetually oppressed, perpetually one bad Tuesday, away from complete collapse. The reality was more complicated than that, and considerably more interesting. Medieval peasants were not passive victims of their circumstances. They were skilled, resourceful, deeply communal people who had developed sophisticated systems for surviving in a world that offered very little margin for error. They also worked harder than almost anyone in recorded human history, which you are about to discover personally. Your name for this week is Thomas. You are a villain, a serf bound to the land of a local lord somewhere in rural England. Around the year 1320, you have a small cottage, a strip of land in the common field, a wife named Agnes, 2 children, and a pig named Nothing, because you are not going to name the pig. You know why. The village around you contains roughly 30 families. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone depends on everyone. The church sits at the village center. The Lord's manor house sits slightly above everything else. Architecturally and philosophically, your week begins before sunrise on Monday. It will not end until Sunday evening, and by Thursday, you will have a completely new understanding of the word tired. The darkness inside your cottage is total when you wake. There are no windows in the modern sense. A single small opening covered with oiled cloth admits the faintest suggestion of pre-dawn gray. You do not have an alarm. You have something considerably more reliable. The roosters begin at roughly the same time every morning, and they do not have a snooze function. You rise from a straw mattress on a low wooden frame. The mattress is stuffed with dried grass and occasionally herbs to discourage insects, with mixed results. Your blanket is rough wool. Your pillow, if you have one, is a folded piece of cloth. The floor is packed earth. In winter, it is cold enough that the first step out of bed requires a specific kind of commitment. This is late autumn, so you are already familiar with that commitment. Agnes is already moving. She has been up before you, which is not unusual. The fire needs rekindling from last night's embers. The fire is everything. It heats the single room. It cooks the food. It keeps the damp at bay. Letting it go completely cold overnight is the kind of mistake you make once. Breakfast on Monday is pottage. It is also breakfast on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Pottage is a thick porridge-like stew made from whatever is available: oats, barley, dried peas, onions, leeks, whatever herbs survived the garden. It is warm. It is filling. It tastes roughly the same every morning. You have long since stopped expecting it to surprise you. You eat from a wooden bowl with a wooden spoon. There is no table in the modern sense. You eat standing or sitting on a low bench near the fire. The children eat quickly because there are things to do. By the time the sky lightens to a pale gray outside, you are already moving toward the field. Monday is a Lord's Day. This means that a significant portion of your working hours today belong not to your own strips of land, but to the Lord's domain, the land He farms directly and which your labor helps maintain. This obligation is called boon work, or simply the week work, depending on the season and the arrangement. You owe the Lord a certain number of days each week throughout the year. Monday often begins that contribution. The field you are working today has already been plowed in an earlier session. Today's task is breaking up the larger clods of earth left by the plow, smoothing the surface, and preparing the ground for winter wheat sowing later in the week. The tool in your hand is a wooden harrow with iron teeth. You drag it across the field in long passes. The iron teeth break the clods and level the surface. It is repetitive, methodical work. It is also cold. Your breath mists in the air. Your hands inside rough wool gloves feel the vibration of every stone the harrow catches. Your boots, leather stuffed with dried grass for insulation, are already damp from the morning dew on the grass. By mid-morning, your shoulders ache. By noon, your back has registered a formal complaint. You stop to eat a piece of hard bread and drink from a leather flask of thin ale. The ale is weak by modern standards. It is safer than the water, which is the sentence that summarizes a great deal about medieval public health. You work until the light begins to fade in the afternoon. There is no clock. You measure time by the sun, by the angle of shadows, by the church bell in the village that rings the canonical hours. When the light goes, the work goes with it. There are no torches in the field, no lanterns bright enough to extend the working day beyond what nature provides. Darkness is a hard boundary. You walk home. The cottage is warm from Agnes's fire. The children are fed. The pig, whose name you are not using, is secured in its corner of the cottage, where it will spend the night sharing warmth with the family, in a practical arrangement that modern sensibilities find surprising. You eat a second bowl of pottage. You sit near the fire for perhaps an hour. Then you sleep. Monday is finished. You have been awake for approximately 15 hours. You have eaten twice. You have worked for most of the daylight. Tomorrow begins the same way. Tuesday belongs partly to your own strips. The medieval open field system divided the land around the village into large common fields. Each field then subdivided into long, narrow strips assigned to individual families. You have several strips scattered across two of the village's three main fields. This scattering is not accidental. Spreading strips across different areas means different families share both the better and poorer quality land. It is a remarkably equitable system by the standards of an age that was not generally famous for equity. Your strips need attention. The autumn plowing must be finished before the ground freezes. You are working with a team today, which is both practical and necessary. Plowing requires an ox team. You do not own a full team of oxen. Almost nobody does. Oxen are expensive to purchase, expensive to feed through winter, and expensive to replace when they die at inconvenient moments. A full plow team typically requires 8 oxen. The village pools resources. Several families contribute animals. Someone contributes the plow itself. Labor is shared and rotated. The system requires cooperation, trust, and a tolerance for your neighbor's opinions about the correct speed at which oxen should be driven. Today, you are guiding the team while your neighbor William controls the plow. Tomorrow, you will switch. The oxen are slow, steady, and have been doing this long enough that they require very little instruction. This is useful because giving detailed instructions to oxen rarely produces the desired outcome. The plow turns heavy, strips of earth in long furrows. Behind you, another neighbor follows with a spade breaking the largest lumps. Behind him, the children of several families walk the freshly turned earth, picking out stones and dropping them into baskets. Children in medieval villages worked from young ages, not in ways that modern labor law would recognize, but in ways that made practical sense within the household economy. Stone picking, bird scaring, herb gathering, water carrying. Tasks sized to small hands and short attention spans. Your daughter is 8. She is currently more interested in a worm she has discovered than in the stones she is supposed to be collecting. This is entirely understandable. The worm is genuinely more interesting than the stones. Lunch today is bread and a small piece of hard cheese. The cheese is made from the milk of a neighbor's goat, traded for some of Agnes's preserved herbs last week. The medieval village economy runs substantially on these small exchanges between households. Nobody is paying anyone in silver for everything. Silver is scarce. Relationships are not. By afternoon, the clouds have thickened, and a light rain has begun. You continue working. Rain is not a reason to stop unless it becomes serious enough to make the field a mud trap. Today, it stays at the level of persistent and unpleasant. You arrive home wet. Agnes has heated water over the fire. You wash your hands and face. A full bath is a weekly luxury at best, and weekly is optimistic. The smell of outdoor work, wet wool, and wood smoke is simply the smell of your life, and you stopped noticing it some time ago. Tuesday evening brings something unusual. A neighbor has butchered a pig this week, the proper pig, the one with a name, and has shared portions with several families as part of an informal exchange network that ensures fresh meat reaches everyone before it spoils. Tonight's pottage has meat in it. This is a significant event. The children eat with noticeably more enthusiasm than usual. You go to sleep full. This is not guaranteed every night. Tonight it happens. Wednesday in medieval rural England is, in many traditions, a half day for the Lord's work. By midday, your obligation to the domain is complete, and the afternoon belongs to your own concerns. This morning, you are threshing. Threshing separates grain from the stalks after harvest. The harvest happened in late summer, and the sheaves have been drying in the barn since then. Now they need to be beaten until the grain separates. The tool is a flail. 2 pieces of wood connected by a short leather strap. You swing the longer handle, so the shorter beater strikes the grain stalks laid across the barn floor. The grain knocks loose. The stalks remain. You repeat this several thousand times. Threshing is loud, dusty, rhythmic work. The barn fills with chaff, the light papery husks that separate from the grain during beating. It gets into your hair, your eyes, your nose. By mid-morning, you are coughing periodically. You work with 2 other men from the village. In a rotating rhythm, one swings, while 2 rest briefly, then switch. 3 flails moving in rhythm is both more efficient and considerably less dangerous than 3 flails moving without coordination. The coordination is important. A flail swung incorrectly by the man beside you is directly hazardous to your continued participation in the threshing process. After the Lord's work releases you at midday, the afternoon is spent on something you have been putting off. The cottage roof has a section where the thatch has thinned, and the last rain came through. Thatching is a skill. You are not a master thatcher, but you know enough to patch a roof, which is the most important thing a medieval peasant can know about thatching. You climb to the roof with bundles of dried reeds gathered from the common marsh earlier in the season. Agnes hands them up to you. You work along the damaged section, layering reeds in the traditional manner, securing them with twisted straw ties. From the roof, you can see the entire village. The church with its small square tower, the mill beside the stream, where your grain will be ground, the Lord's manor with its larger buildings and enclosed garden, the strips of field stretching beyond. It is, viewed from this angle, a remarkably complete small world. Everything required for survival exists within walking distance. Everything outside this circle is, for most purposes, theoretical. You finish the roof as the light begins to fail. It will hold through winter. Probably. Wednesday evening the priest visits. Father Edmund comes around the village periodically, which means he sometimes arrives when you are exhausted and would prefer to be sleeping. Tonight he brings news from the market town 12 miles away. The price of grain has moved. There has been illness in a village to the north. A merchant passed through with cloth from Flanders. This is how information travels in 1320. By foot, by mouth, one village to the next, arriving days or weeks after the events it describes. Father Edmund is simultaneously a spiritual authority, a literacy resource, a medical advisor of limited competence, and the village's primary news source. You listen, ask a few questions, offer him a cup of ale, and learn that the world outside your village continued existing this week without requiring your involvement. This is generally considered good news. Thursday arrives with the first hard frost of the season. You know this before you open your eyes because the quality of cold inside the cottage has changed. The fire is lower than it should be. Your breath mists visibly in the dim interior. The frost matters practically and immediately. Frozen ground cannot be plowed. Any plowing still needed must wait until the frost thaws, which may be today or maybe several days from now, depending on what the sky decides. This means Thursday becomes a maintenance day. There are always tools to repair. Handles split, leather straps crack, iron fittings loosen. You spend the morning in the relative warmth of the cottage, working on a plow handle that split last week and has been waiting for a quiet moment. You do not go to a hardware store. You go to the woodpile behind the cottage, where you have been storing a seasoned piece of ash for exactly this kind of need. Ash is flexible and strong. Medieval tool handles are almost always ash when the maker has any choice. You shape the new handle with a draw knife, a two-handled blade. You pull toward yourself along the wood. The shavings curl onto the floor. The children collect them for kindling because nothing is wasted. The shavings will start fires for the next week. Agnes is making tallow candles today. Tallow is rendered animal fat, and it is one of the primary light sources in your home. The candles burn smokily and smell of the animal they came from. They are not pleasant by modern standards. They are, however, light. In a world where darkness arrives in mid-afternoon, during winter, candles represent the difference between a productive evening and sitting in complete blackness waiting for sunrise. You eat lunch and then walk to the mill. The Lord's mill is where all grain in the village must be ground into flour. This is not optional. The Lord owns the mill. You owe him a portion of whatever you grind as payment for using it. This is called the millstone toll, and it is one of the small, constant frictions between peasant life and the obligations that surround it. The miller is a figure of complicated reputation in medieval villages. He controls something everyone needs. He has significant opportunity to take slightly more than his entitled portion. Whether the miller in your village is honest is a matter of ongoing local debate that will never be definitively resolved. You wait your turn, watch the grinding carefully, collect your flour, and return home. Thursday evening is quiet. The frost has kept most people inside. The village is unusually still. You sit near the fire, mending a leather boot, while Agnes spins wool by firelight. The spinning wheel turns. The fire crackles. Outside, the frost tightens its grip on the fields. This is an ordinary Thursday evening in 1320. You're tired, warm, and fed. 3 out of 3 is not guaranteed in this century. Friday is a fast day. The medieval church calendar is full of fast days. Fridays throughout the year, Wednesdays in some traditions, the entirety of Lent, vigils before major feasts. On fast days, meat is forbidden. Sometimes dairy is also restricted. This does not mean you eat nothing. It means the pottage this morning contains no meat and is heavier on dried peas, beans, and whatever vegetables remain from the autumn store. For many peasant families, this is not a dramatic adjustment. Meat is not an everyday ingredient in most weeks anyway. Fast days formalize an absence that would often exist regardless of religious instruction. You spend the morning doing something that sounds almost peaceful: hedging. The boundaries between strips, between common land and private land, between your village's territory and the next, are marked and maintained by hedgerows. These need cutting back, reshaping, and reinforcing regularly. Hedging is skilled work. A well-laid hedge is a living fence, its branches woven together, low enough to keep animals in or out, dense enough to resist a determined sheep. A badly laid hedge is a suggestion that a determined sheep will ignore entirely. You work along a boundary hedge for most of the morning, with a billhook, a curved blade, on a long handle. The cut branches are gathered and used. Some become fuel, some become wattle, the woven branch panels used in construction and fencing. Nothing that can be useful is left on the ground. In the afternoon, you carry a message to a neighboring village for the village headman, the reeve. The reeve coordinates the village's agricultural activities, manages the Lord's interests at the village level, and serves as the primary local administrator. Walking to the neighboring village takes about 40 minutes. You deliver the message, receive a reply, and walk back. This is entirely normal. Information travels at walking pace. In 1320, on the return walk, you pass through a section of woodland that belongs to the Lord. You are not supposed to take timber from it. You are allowed to collect fallen wood and dead branches, which is called the rite of Estover. You collect a bundle of fallen wood. The line between fallen wood and wood that fell very recently with assistance is one that medieval peasants managed with considerable pragmatic flexibility. You arrive home with the message delivered, the wood collected, and the specific expression of someone who is not thinking about anything in particular. Friday evening, a neighbor's child is sick. Agnes goes to help because Agnes knows more about practical medicine than Father Edmund does, which is not a criticism of Father Edmund, so much as an acknowledgement that Agnes has been watching what works and what doesn't for 20 years. She brings dried herbs, makes an infusion, checks the child's color and temperature with a practiced hand, and gives the mother specific instructions. Whether she would describe this as medicine is uncertain. She would describe it as knowing what to do. Medieval peasant women carried an enormous weight of practical medical knowledge. It was transmitted between women, accumulated across generations, tested constantly against genuine need. The church had complicated feelings about this. The women continued doing it anyway, because children continued getting sick. Saturday arrives with the frost still present, but weakening. By mid-morning, the ground has softened enough to work. This morning, you are at the common pasture with the village animals. The common land is shared, grazing ground where the village's collective livestock feed. Managing who uses it, when, and in what numbers is a matter of ongoing communal negotiation, governed by local custom. Your contribution to the communal herd today is the pig, not the pig from Tuesday. Your pig, whose name you are not using. The animals are watched by whoever's turn it is that week. Today it is your turn, which means standing in a field watching animals eat grass for several hours. This sounds almost relaxing until the third hour, when the cold has worked through your clothing and one of the oxen has decided to investigate a section of the boundary hedge with more enthusiasm than it merits. You redirect the ox. The ox considers your input. The ox decides to comply, eventually, on its own schedule. Saturday afternoon is for the kitchen garden. The garden behind your cottage produces vegetables throughout the growing season. Right now, in late autumn, it is producing the last of what will be harvested before winter closes it down entirely. Leeks are still standing. Some kale, parsnips beneath the soil. You dig parsnips, while Agnes cuts the last of the leeks. The children pull the remaining bean plants, stripping the dried pods for the seeds inside, which will be stored for next spring's planting and for the soup pot through winter. Every seed matters. Every dried bean in that pod represents next year's harvest in miniature. Peasant farmers understood seed selection, soil conditions, and seasonal timing with an expertise that came not from books, but from the accumulated knowledge of generations farming the same land. Saturday evening is the most social night of the week. Several families gather at one of the larger cottages. Someone has ale. Someone has produced a small amount of hard cider from the autumn apple pressing. There is food, not extravagant, but enough. People talk. They talk about the frost, about the harvest quality, about whose ox has been performing poorly, about the price the Lord's reeve set for the winter wheat. They tell stories. Someone plays a simple instrument, a type of flute carved from bone. The children chase each other around the adults until they fall asleep in corners. This is the medieval equivalent of the weekend. It lasts a few hours. It involves people who have worked alongside each other all week, choosing to spend their limited free time together anyway. That is not obligation. That is community. And community, in 1320, is the structure that stands between your family and genuine catastrophe. A bad harvest alone is survivable if neighbors share. A sick animal alone is manageable if someone helps with the work it leaves behind. An injury that takes you out of the fields for a week is recoverable if the village adjusts around you. The medieval peasant was not merely surviving as an individual, he was surviving as part of a web of mutual obligation and genuine affection that the historical record tends to underrepresent, because webs of mutual affection do not generate the kind of dramatic documents that survive 7 centuries. Sunday begins with church. This is not optional, and it is also not resented. The church service is simultaneously a religious obligation, a community gathering, a weekly news exchange, a legal announcement board, and one of the few hours of the week where you are not doing physical labor. You dress in your better clothing. Better is relative. It means the tunic without the mended tear at the shoulder. Agnes wears a clean linen coif. The children are made presentable through the application of maternal determination. The village walks to church together. Father Edmund conducts the service in Latin, which almost none of you understand. This does not diminish the experience as much as it might seem to. The ritual, the music, the candles, the familiar rhythms of the service provide something that does not require translation. After the service, the village stands outside the church for what functions as a weekly community meeting. Announcements are made. Disputes are briefly aired. Plans for the coming week's communal work are coordinated. The reeve announces that Monday will begin the winter wheat sowing. Everyone who owes boon work to the Lord should be at the east field before the second bell. You already knew this. Everyone already knew this. The announcement makes it official. Sunday afternoon is yours. This is perhaps the most disorienting thing about a medieval peasant's week. Viewed from the modern perspective, 6 days of grinding, cold, skilled, exhausting labor, and then Sunday afternoon arrives, and there is genuinely nothing required of you. You sit in the weak autumn sun outside the cottage. Agnes sits beside you. The children play in the lane. The pig, whose name you are absolutely not using, roots contentedly in the small enclosed area behind the cottage. You do not go anywhere. There's nowhere nearby to go. You do not read. Most peasants cannot. You do not have entertainment in the modern sense. You rest. You talk with Agnes about the coming week, about the children, about the neighbor whose cough has worsened, about whether the parsnips should be stored differently this year. Conversation about ordinary things between 2 people who share a life. This is Sunday in 1320. It is small. It is warm in the way that very ordinary things can be warm when the alternative has been 6 days of frost and field work. Sunday evening brings the week full circle. The pottage, the fire, the straw mattress, the roosters beginning their preparations for an opinion about Monday morning. 7 days, as Thomas have revealed something that no list of medieval hardships quite captures. The peasant's life was not simply difficult. It was precisely difficult. Every hardship was specific, manageable, and understood. The cold was predictable. The hunger followed seasons. The labor followed the land. What the medieval peasant lacked in comfort, he largely compensated for incompetence. He knew his soil. He knew his animals. He knew his neighbors. He knew exactly what needed doing, and when and how. This knowledge was real, hard-won, and genuinely impressive. He also had almost no margin. One failed harvest could mean genuine starvation. One serious illness could mean losing the strips. One bad lord could mean the thin line between managed hardship and complete collapse disappeared overnight. That vulnerability was always present. It shaped everything: the communal arrangements, the careful seed saving, the sharing of meat when an animal was slaughtered, the network of mutual obligation between households. None of this was sentimentality. It was survival architecture built by people who understood exactly how fragile their position was. Modern comfort makes the fragility invisible. We do not experience the weather as a direct threat to our food supply. We do not need our neighbors to survive a difficult winter. We do not watch the sky in autumn with the specific anxiety of someone whose entire year depends on what it decides to do next. The medieval peasant watched that sky every single day. He also ate pottage every single morning and somehow kept moving, which, if you think about it for a moment, might be the most impressive thing about him. The next time Monday morning feels difficult, remember Thomas. He was already in the field before you opened your eyes, and he was doing it with wet boots, a shared ox, and absolutely no coffee. Every week, every year, for an entire lifetime. A day in the life of a medieval executioner does not begin with applause. It does not begin with trumpets, and it certainly does not begin with respect. Instead, it begins on the quiet edge of town, in the part of the city respectable people preferred not to think about for too long. If you lived in a medieval town, you almost certainly knew where the executioner lived, not because there were signs pointing toward his house, but because everyone deliberately kept their distance. It was always described the same way: past the old wall, near the tannery, beside the gravediggers and butchers, among the professions society depended upon, but never truly embraced. Before the first light reaches the rooftops, the executioner wakes, not because he enjoys mornings. Nobody really enjoyed medieval mornings, but because daylight means work, and work means someone, somewhere, has broken enough laws to justify his profession. There's no hot shower waiting, no coffee brewing in the corner, no alarm clock playing gentle music. His bed is little more than a wooden frame filled with straw, covered with heavy blankets during winter. If fortune smiles upon him, the roof stayed dry through the night. Although medieval roofs occasionally had their own opinions about keeping the rain outside, he rises slowly, stretching aching shoulders that have spent years lifting heavy swords and carrying bodies. Contrary to popular imagination, executioners were not always giant men built like stone fortresses. Many looked perfectly ordinary. The profession demanded strength, certainly, but far more importantly, it demanded precision. A single clean strike required years of practice. Missing your target was not merely embarrassing. It could become a public disaster, witnessed by hundreds. Nobody wanted to earn the reputation of being the executioner who needed 4 attempts. Medieval performance reviews could be exceptionally unforgiving. Outside, dawn slowly spreads across the countryside. Smoke rises from chimneys, while roosters announce the morning with the confidence of creatures that have never paid taxes. Bakers are already kneading dough. Blacksmiths begin lighting their forges, and merchants prepare their stalls for another market day. Meanwhile, the executioner sits down to an entirely ordinary breakfast. Bread, perhaps a little cheese, maybe an onion, and if yesterday was generous, a bowl of leftover stew. History has a funny habit of making dramatic professions sound exciting every second of every day. But reality usually involves chewing stale bread while quietly hoping the weather stays dry. As he finishes eating, he considers what the day may bring. It could involve a public execution, or it could involve something far less dramatic. Films often suggest executioners spent every day swinging swords, but that would require an astonishing amount of crime. Medieval towns simply weren't that enthusiastic. In reality, executioners had dozens of responsibilities. They removed dead animals from roads, controlled stray livestock, cleaned certain unpleasant public spaces, punished criminals whose sentences stopped short of execution, maintained official equipment, and in some places even helped treat broken bones. Because oddly enough, people assumed anyone familiar with the human body probably knew a thing or two about anatomy. After breakfast, he checks today's instructions, not with a calendar app, obviously, but through messages delivered by town officials or magistrates the previous day. If an execution is scheduled, timing matters. Authorities preferred carrying out justice on market days, when plenty of witnesses were already gathered, apparently buying vegetables and observing criminal punishment fit together rather neatly in the medieval schedule. If no execution awaits, there are always tools needing attention, because an executioner's equipment demands constant care. His workshop smells of leather, wood, oil, and polished steel. Against one wall rests the execution sword. Unlike the pointed swords carried into battle, this one has a broad blade and a rounded tip because it serves only one purpose, delivering a single accurate strike. He examines every inch of the blade. Any rust, however small, could weaken the steel. Any tiny chip could turn a swift execution into a terrible spectacle. Contrary to popular belief, professional executioners desperately wanted executions to be quick. Competence protected not only the condemned from unnecessary suffering, but also the executioner's own reputation. He sharpens the blade with patient, rhythmic movements. Stone slides against steel with quiet consistency, no rushing, no shortcuts. Modern workers update software. He sharpens metal. This sword represents his livelihood, and maintaining it is as important as any carpenter caring for tools or any blacksmith tending a forge. Every careful stroke reflects years of experience, because when the moment finally comes, there will be no opportunity for mistakes. Inside the house, his family slowly wakes. This surprises many people. Executioners married, raised children, argued over household expenses, and lived remarkably ordinary family lives. Despite their unusual profession, their greatest challenge was not life inside the home, but life outside it. Society depended on them, while simultaneously avoiding them. Neighbors needed their services, but rarely invited them to celebrations. It was possible to be essential and isolated at exactly the same time. The children eat breakfast, knowing that their future may already be decided. Many executioners trained their own sons, not because children dreamed of inheriting such work, but because many other professions refused to accept them. Guilds often closed their doors. Respectable families discouraged friendships, and marriage opportunities became limited. Executioner families frequently married into other executioner families from neighboring towns, creating strange dynasties built not upon wealth or noble blood, but upon a profession everyone needed and almost nobody wanted. Church bells begin ringing across the town. Horses clatter over uneven streets. Merchants open their stalls, and dogs bark enthusiastically at absolutely nothing important. The executioner dresses in sturdy boots, simple clothing, a leather belt, and heavy gloves. Contrary to popular imagination, he does not wander around permanently dressed in dramatic black robes. Those famous costumes mostly belong to later paintings and theatrical performances. Real executioners dressed practically, adapting to the weather, local customs, and the demands of their work. When he steps into the street, the reactions begin almost immediately. Some people nod politely, others pretend not to notice him at all. A few curious children stare until their parents gently guide them elsewhere. There are rarely open insults or loud confrontations. Instead, there is distance. Medieval society valued reputation deeply, and the executioner occupied an uncomfortable place within it. He was officially employed by civic authorities, yet socially polluted because his work involved death. He enforced the law and then found himself quietly excluded because he had done exactly that. As he walks toward the town center, people naturally leave space around him. No one announces it, yet everyone understands. It is almost like an invisible circle follows him through the streets. Passing the bakery, he catches the smell of fresh bread. The baker acknowledges him politely because business remains business, and money spends the same regardless of occupation. At the butcher's stall, conversation briefly pauses before quietly continuing once he has walked away. It is not hatred so much as discomfort. People generally prefer not to think about death while buying their dinner. Eventually, he reaches the courthouse, where clerks organize documents, magistrates discuss legal matters, and messengers hurry between offices, carrying sealed instructions. The executioner takes no part in these legal debates. His role is not to judge innocence or guilt. Those decisions have already been made. He is simply the final step in a long legal process, carrying out sentences determined by others. Grim though his profession may be, it remains only one piece of a much larger system. Officials explain the day's schedule. Perhaps the condemned prisoner has requested a final confession. Perhaps relatives have asked permission to claim the body afterward. Perhaps the weather has delayed preparations. Everything follows procedure, because even death generates paperwork. Medieval governments loved keeping records almost as much as modern ones do. Every instruction is confirmed carefully before anyone leaves for the town square. If an execution is planned, preparations begin immediately. Guards escort the prisoner, while workers inspect the scaffold. Ropes are checked, wooden beams examined, stairs tested, and barriers arranged to guide the crowd. Public executions required surprisingly careful organization. Popular imagination often expects chaos, but authorities preferred order. Markets continued operating nearby, merchants kept selling goods, and ordinary life rarely paused completely, simply because justice happened to be unfolding nearby. The executioner carries his tools carefully wrapped in cloth, professional equipment deserves protection from rain and rust. As he approaches the scaffold, carpenters tighten loose boards, while guards inspect every step leading to the platform. Town officials exchange final instructions. Everything must function correctly, because once hundreds of people gather, every mistake becomes painfully obvious. Quietly, he places one hand upon the wooden platform, confirming it feels solid beneath his boots. Standing where he will soon work, he studies the space with experienced eyes. He measures distances, imagines the angle of the swing, and checks his footing without drawing attention to himself. None of this happens dramatically. Every movement has been practiced countless times during years of training with wooden targets, animal carcasses, and endless repetition. Executioners did not become skilled overnight. Precision required discipline, patience, and technical knowledge developed through years of difficult practice. Meanwhile, the square slowly fills with people. Merchants continue selling goods, while travelers pause to watch because unusual events attracted curious crowds long before smartphones existed. News spreads quickly from stall to stall. There will be an execution today. Some attend from genuine curiosity, others because civic authorities expect public participation. Still others simply because missing an important public event means having nothing interesting to discuss later. Before social media, the medieval marketplace served much the same purpose, and so the executioner waits quietly beside the scaffold. No dramatic speeches, no theatrical poses, just patience. Around him, hundreds of ordinary lives continue unfolding. Children asking questions, merchants making sales, neighbors exchanging gossip, officials reviewing documents. His workday is about to reach its most visible moment, yet he remains almost invisible within the crowd. And as the square grows silent, nearly everyone watching shares one quiet hope: that they will never stand where either the executioner or the condemned prisoner now waits. The town square has been awake for hours now, although not everyone has come specifically for the execution. Some people are buying fresh bread, while others are arguing over the price of onions, convinced that today's vegetables cost more than yesterday's. A blacksmith is already covered in soot before breakfast has fully settled, and somewhere nearby, a merchant is enthusiastically insisting that his cloth came all the way from Italy. It probably didn't. Medieval marketing was optimistic. Life, rather inconveniently, continues moving even when someone is about to lose it. That is one of the strangest things about medieval cities. An execution is certainly important, but it is still only one event in a very busy day. Somebody's cow has wandered into a neighbor's field. Someone else is preparing for a wedding this afternoon, and the market refuses to stop simply because justice has an appointment. Our executioner stands quietly beside the scaffold. He has already inspected the platform twice, then checked it a third time, because professional habits are difficult to ignore. The sword remains wrapped in thick cloth. There is no reason to expose the blade before it becomes necessary, and steel stays cleaner that way. A town official approaches, carrying several folded documents. They are not for the executioner to read. They belong to the magistrates, because everything has already been carefully recorded. The prisoner's name, the crime, the sentence, and the witnesses. Even medieval governments appreciated paperwork, and centuries later, historians would quietly thank them for their obsession with documentation. The executioner simply waits until someone tells him it is time. Patience may be the least discussed skill in his profession. Hours of waiting, only a few minutes of work, and then more waiting afterward. A church bell suddenly echoes across the rooftops, its deep sound rolling through narrow streets before fading into the cool morning air. That single bell serves many purposes. It marks the hour, calls people to worship, warns of danger, and today it quietly announces that official business is about to begin. People in the square drift a little closer, not rushing or pushing, simply moving toward the scaffold, almost without realizing it. Children climb onto barrels for a better view, while parents lift younger ones onto their shoulders. A few older citizens search for comfortable places to sit because even public justice could take a while. Near the front stands a merchant from another town who arrived before sunrise, hoping to sell wool. Instead, he accidentally scheduled his visit on execution day. Well, that will certainly become an interesting story when he returns home. Travel souvenirs looked rather different in the Middle Ages. A young apprentice whispers to his master, asking whether he has ever seen an execution before. The older man nods without much emotion. Probably. Most adults had. Public executions were not rare spectacles that happened once every generation. Depending on the city, they might occur several times each year, sometimes more, sometimes less. They remained unusual enough to attract attention, but common enough that nearly everyone understood the routine. Nobody asks what happens next, because everyone already knows. There is an odd familiarity to the entire process. The details may change, but the order rarely does. Medieval society had turned justice into something almost ceremonial, a sequence of events repeated often enough that the crowd could quietly predict each step before it happened. At last, the officials emerge from the courthouse, wearing long robes and carrying themselves with serious expressions, perfected through years of legal responsibility. Their entire careers revolve around making difficult decisions, sound extremely official, which, to be fair, describes quite a lot of government work throughout history. The executioner acknowledges them with nothing more than a small nod. No salute, no dramatic declaration, just quiet recognition between professionals who understand their respective roles. One magistrate walks over for a brief conversation. The discussion is entirely practical. How is the weather? Has the platform been inspected? Is the prisoner prepared? Has everything been arranged? The executioner answers simply, yes, good. Then everyone waits for the one person whose arrival matters more than anyone else's, the prisoner inside the town jail. The condemned man has been awake for hours as well. Contrary to dramatic stories, he has probably not spent the morning screaming endlessly into the darkness. Human beings react to death in remarkably different ways. Some cry, some pray, some become strangely calm. Others continue insisting they are innocent until the very end, while a few quietly accept whatever is about to happen. There's no single correct response because fear has never followed a single pattern. A priest enters the prison cell and offers one final opportunity for confession, prayer, conversation, or simply silence. Whatever is needed. The executioner does not interrupt. His work begins later. He waits patiently outside. Another reminder that medieval executions were surprisingly structured. Everyone had a role, and everyone knew exactly when that role began. The guards unlock the prison door with heavy iron keys that seem almost as weighty as the thick wooden doors themselves. Everything inside a medieval prison appears unnecessarily heavy. Perhaps builders simply distrusted lightweight architecture. The prisoner steps into the corridor, and chains rattle softly with every movement. The sound echoes through the stone walls, not loudly, but just enough to remind everyone nearby what those chains represent. Outside, guards organize themselves carefully. Weapons are inspected. Positions are assigned. Nobody wants confusion once they leave the jail because even calm crowds can become unpredictable. The executioner quietly joins the procession, walking behind the officials rather than beside the prisoner. He is not leading the march. He is simply another participant following long-established custom. As the prison gates open, fresh morning air replaces the damp smell of stone. The procession begins moving, slowly and without hurry. There is no advantage in rushing. Narrow streets lined with timber-framed houses stretch ahead while townspeople quietly gather along both sides. Some remove their hats, others cross themselves. Many simply watch without speaking. Conversations shrink into whispers as the condemned walks forward with measured steps. His clothing is plain. Sometimes prisoners were given clean garments for the occasion, while others wore whatever remained from their imprisonment. Practices varied enormously across Europe because history rarely offers one simple answer. Every kingdom, every city, and every century added its own customs to the same familiar ritual. As the procession winds deeper into town, everyday life briefly pauses. A woman carrying fresh milk steps respectfully aside. A carpenter rests his hammer against unfinished wood. Even the dogs seem unusually quiet, although perhaps that is simply how memory prefers to remember scenes like this. One small boy tugs gently at his mother's sleeve and asks, "Is that the executioner?" She nods. The child stares openly, while the executioner notices him from the corner of his eye. Children often stare because they have not yet learned the complicated social rules that adults spend their lives obeying. Adults usually glance away after only a moment. Children simply observe. The executioner almost smiles. Almost. Then he continues walking, having seen that same mixture of curiosity and uncertainty hundreds of times before. The procession finally passes through the marketplace, where merchants lower their voices but continue doing business. Coins still exchange hands. Customers still argue over cabbage prices because even on execution day, someone will absolutely complain about vegetables. Some traditions survive every century. The smell of fresh bread mixes with horse manure, while wood smoke drifts lazily through the air. Somewhere nearby, someone is roasting onions, adding another layer to the unmistakable aroma of a medieval town. Modern visitors might politely describe the smell as authentic. Less polite visitors would probably hold their noses. The executioner stopped noticing long ago because people become accustomed to almost anything. Ahead, the wooden scaffold rises above the crowd, simple, solid, undecorated. No elaborate curtains or theatrical scenery. Officially, this is not entertainment. It is justice. Whether every spectator has gathered for entirely noble reasons, well, humans have always been curious creatures. The guards guide the prisoner toward the wooden steps, and for the first time that morning, the executioner walks ahead of everyone else. His work has finally begun. Each board of the scaffold creaks softly beneath his heavy boots as he climbs onto the platform. Before doing anything else, he checks everything one final time. Then he checks it again. Professional habits are difficult to silence. Satisfied, he carefully unwraps the execution sword. Morning sunlight catches the polished steel, and several people in the crowd instinctively fall silent. Not because there is anything magical about the blade, but because polished steel has a remarkable ability to command attention. He inspects every inch of it one last time. No dust, no moisture, no damage. Perfect, exactly as it should be. Without ceremony, he lays it gently on a wooden stand where it belongs. Nearby rests a simple wooden block, although not every execution required one. Some prisoners knelt, some stood, and others rested against specially prepared supports. Medieval Europe loved local traditions, and justice was no exception. A few moments later, the prisoner reaches the platform. Guards remove some restraints while maintaining careful control. Enough freedom to stand correctly, but not enough to create unnecessary danger. Again, everything follows routine. One official unfolds the legal document and begins reading aloud. His voice carries surprisingly well across the square, helped by years of public speaking. First come the charges, then the sentence. Most people gathered here have already heard the rumors, but now they hear the official version. Law has always preferred formal announcements, even when everyone already knows the outcome. The executioner listens quietly. He has heard speeches like this dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. Every case is different, yet every ceremony somehow feels familiar. When the reading ends, another short pause settles over the square. If requested, the priest offers one final prayer. Sometimes the condemned chooses to speak, sometimes not. Some proclaim their innocence until the very last moment. Others apologize for their crimes. Some ask forgiveness from family members, standing somewhere within the crowd. Others simply thank those who remained beside them. History remembers famous last words because they make excellent stories. But reality was usually much quieter. Most people, even at the end of their lives, spoke ordinary sentences. They worried about loved ones, expressed regret, whispered prayers, or simply remained silent. History has a habit of preserving extraordinary speeches while quietly forgetting the thousands of ordinary ones. Now the executioner steps forward. His voice remains calm, professional, and surprisingly gentle. He explains exactly what the prisoner should do: where to kneel, how to position the head, and when to remain perfectly still. Movies often portray executioners shouting harsh commands across the scaffold, but many historical accounts suggest something very different. Quiet instructions reduced confusion, and cooperation reduced suffering. Everyone preferred that outcome, especially the executioner himself. His reputation depended entirely upon his skill. A swift, accurate execution demonstrated professionalism. A mistake, on the other hand, could transform a solemn event into public outrage. Competence mattered more than intimidation. The prisoner nods slowly. His hands tremble, which is perhaps the least surprising detail of the entire morning. No historian has ever criticized someone for appearing nervous under such circumstances. The executioner quietly removes his gloves because leather can slip, while bare hands provide better control over the sword's grip. He rolls his shoulders once, not dramatically, but simply to loosen muscles that have performed this movement countless times before. Years of experience have taught him exactly how his body should feel before lifting the blade. Every execution begins with the same careful preparation. Routine exists because routine leaves very little room for mistakes. One guard steps backward, another quietly moves aside. Suddenly, the platform feels much larger than before. The crowd fades into the background as the executioner's attention narrows completely. He no longer notices hundreds of faces watching from below. He notices only one person. Accuracy demands absolute concentration. Nothing else matters now. He studies the prisoner's position carefully. Neck aligned, shoulders relaxed, body balanced. Good, very good. Every detail has been checked because years of training have taught him that careful preparation matters more than dramatic confidence. This is not a performance. It is a profession. A gentle breeze drifts across the square. Somewhere within the crowd, someone coughs softly. A horse snorts beyond the marketplace, annoyed by something only horses understand. Life continues, producing ordinary sounds, even during extraordinary moments. That may be one of history's quietest truths. The executioner inhales slowly, then exhales just as calmly. His heartbeat remains steady, not because the work has become easy, but because experience has transformed fear into routine. Without routine, few people could perform difficult responsibilities for very long. Soldiers understand this. Surgeons understand this. Executioners understood it too. Habit becomes a shield against hesitation. The sword begins to rise. Not rushed, not exaggerated. Just one smooth, practiced movement refined through years of repetition. Every sharpening session, every practice swing, every inspection of the blade, every aching shoulder, after long hours of training, has prepared him for this single responsibility. Around the scaffold, hundreds of people stop moving almost at once. Conversations disappear. Merchants pause in the middle of counting coins. Children, who had whispered questions all morning, suddenly fall silent. Even the birds seem strangely absent for a single heartbeat. The entire square waits together, without anyone needing to ask for silence. The executioner never looks toward the crowd. He never has. Their reactions are not part of his responsibility. His attention remains fixed entirely upon the task before him, because precision allows no distractions. In many ways, this quiet focus defines his profession far more than the sword itself. History often remembers executioners as frightening figures wrapped in mystery, yet the reality was usually much less theatrical. They were trained professionals, carrying out a legal duty assigned by civic authorities. Difficult work, certainly. Unpleasant work, unquestionably. But work all the same. For one long moment, time itself seems reluctant to move. The church bells have fallen silent. The marketplace has stopped buzzing. The officials stand perfectly still. Families watch without speaking. The prisoner remains where he has been instructed. The executioner waits until every final detail is exactly right. Medieval justice valued ceremony almost as much as punishment, and every participant understood the importance of following the established order. Around them, the town seems to hold its breath together, suspended between ordinary life and an event everyone will remember long after the market closes. And then, just before history moves forward once again, there is only stillness. The executioner grips the sword with practiced confidence, his expression revealing almost nothing. The magistrates wait. The priest lowers his eyes. The guards remain motionless. The crowd stands in complete silence. Somewhere in the distance, smoke continues rising from kitchen chimneys. Bread continues baking inside warm ovens, and life quietly prepares to resume as though nothing unusual has happened at all. That, perhaps, is the strangest truth about medieval justice. Even on the morning of an execution, the world never truly stopped. It simply paused for one long, quiet breath before continuing exactly as it always had, and then it is over. The crowd exhales almost as one, as though everyone has been holding the same breath without realizing it. Some people quietly cross themselves. Others lower their heads for a brief moment before turning away. A few simply stare at the empty space where all of their attention had rested only seconds before. There is no cheering, no celebration, and very little conversation, despite what many films would have us believe. Medieval executions were often far quieter than we imagine. Most people standing in the square had already witnessed death many times before. Disease, famine, childbirth, and war had made it an all too familiar companion. Today's execution was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was a public reminder that the law, however imperfect, had reached its conclusion. The officials step forward first, because even the ending follows procedure. One magistrate formally confirms that the sentence has been carried out. Another carefully records the outcome in official documents. Even the final moments require paperwork, proving once again that governments have always loved keeping records. The priest quietly finishes his prayers, while the guards finally allow themselves to relax after hours of standing alert. Their responsibilities are ending. The executioner's responsibilities, however, are not. While everyone else begins looking toward the future, he remains focused on the present. There is still work to do before this day can truly be considered complete. He lifts the sword once again, not dramatically or ceremonially, but simply because steel must be cared for. He wipes the blade clean with practiced movements before inspecting its edge one final time. Still sharp, still straight. Good. Satisfied, he wraps it carefully inside the same thick cloth that protected it earlier that morning. One more job completed. Modern workers close, laptop computers, or file away documents when their workday ends. The executioner wraps steel inside cloth and quietly prepares to leave. It is an ordinary routine within a profession that almost nobody else would ever describe as ordinary. Around the scaffold, the square slowly comes back to life. Workers begin dismantling temporary barriers, while merchants reopen conversations that had paused only minutes before. Someone resumes arguing over the price of fish as though nothing particularly unusual has happened. Another customer insists yesterday's bread was larger than today's. Life possesses a remarkable ability to continue, even after standing perfectly still for a few solemn moments. Markets return to business because people still need food. Farmers still need tools. Horses still need shoes. Medieval towns, like modern cities, cannot remain suspended forever. The executioner helps lower the body with the same careful professionalism he has shown throughout the morning. Depending on the customs of the kingdom and the nature of the sentence, relatives may be allowed to claim it. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are not. Every region follows slightly different traditions because history has never been kind enough to fit inside one simple rulebook. Once everything has been completed, the scaffold itself is inspected. Loose boards are tightened, tools are gathered, and the platform is cleaned so that tomorrow it may serve an entirely different purpose. The same square that witnessed justice today may host a lively market, a festival, or children chasing one another between stalls before the week is over. Wood remembers nothing. People do. With his tools gathered, the executioner climbs quietly down from the platform. No applause follows him. No speeches thank him for performing a difficult duty. There are no medals, no public expressions of gratitude, and certainly no celebrations. He simply begins the familiar walk home. Once again, the crowd parts naturally to let him pass. Not because they admire him, and not entirely because they fear him. Mostly because he reminds them of something deeply uncomfortable. Every society, no matter how civilized it believes itself to be, eventually asks someone else to carry out its hardest decisions. Today, that someone was him. As he walks through the streets, the town has already begun returning to normal. The baker places fresh loaves onto wooden shelves, while customers line up outside his shop. Blacksmiths strike glowing iron with steady rhythm. Children laugh once more, their curiosity already drifting towards some new distraction. A dog enthusiastically chases a chicken through the marketplace, with absolutely no success whatsoever. Life insists on being ordinary. It refuses to remain trapped inside solemn moments for very long. The executioner notices all of it without saying a word. He has watched this same transformation happen many times before. By the time he reaches the small house, waiting near the edge of town, the events of the morning already feel strangely distant. His wife may ask how the day went, and he probably answers with only a few simple words because there is very little left to say. The children continue their chores without ceremony. Lunch is prepared over a small fire. The familiar crackle of burning wood fills the room while sunlight filters quietly through narrow windows. Outside, the town continues living exactly as it did yesterday. Inside, another ordinary afternoon begins in an extraordinarily ordinary household. For everyone else, however, today's execution will become another story told over supper. I was there. I saw what happened. I heard every word the magistrate spoke. With every retelling, the details will shift just a little. Human memory has always enjoyed adding extra seasoning to old stories. Someone will remember the crowd as larger than it really was. Someone else will swear the prisoner looked perfectly calm, while another insists the opposite. That is simply how stories travel through history. They grow, shrink, and reshape themselves with every new storyteller. For the executioner, though, today becomes nothing more than another page in a long and unusual career. Tomorrow may look completely different. There may be no executions at all. Perhaps he will spend the day removing a dead horse from the roadside. Perhaps he will sharpen tools until the afternoon sun disappears. Perhaps a physician will ask him to help reset a broken arm because, oddly enough, years of working around the human body earned executioners unexpected reputations for practical anatomical knowledge. Or perhaps he will simply repair the scaffold so it remains ready for whenever the magistrates next require it. History rarely gives anyone only one job, and the executioner is no exception. Like everyone else in the medieval town, tomorrow morning he will wake before sunrise, begin another ordinary day, and quietly continue doing the work that everyone depended upon, and almost everyone preferred to ignore. As evening slowly settles over the town, the executioner sits quietly outside his small home. The last warmth of the sun rests gently on the rooftops, while church bells ring once more across the fields. Thin trails of smoke rise from hundreds of chimneys as families prepare their evening meals. The noisy marketplace that bustled with conversation only a few hours ago has become calm again. Merchants have packed away their goods, blacksmiths have allowed their forges to cool, and children who spent the afternoon racing through dusty streets are finally being called home. The executioner watches the fading light without saying very much. After a profession built around noise, crowds, and public ceremony, he seems to appreciate silence more than most people ever could. He knows something that very few others ever stop to consider. Most people will remember the condemned prisoner. A smaller number will remember the magistrates who announced the sentence. Some may even remember the priest who offered the final prayer. Almost no one, however, will remember the man who quietly arrived before sunrise, inspected every tool, checked every board of the scaffold, carried out his duty with practiced precision, and then walked away without expecting thanks. History has always been selective about the people it remembers. We tend to remember kings who wore crowns, queens who ruled kingdoms, and generals who won famous battles. Sometimes we remember criminals whose stories became legends. Yet only occasionally do we remember the ordinary professionals who quietly stood between law and legend, performing jobs that no one else wished to do. The medieval executioner belonged to that forgotten group. He was feared by his neighbors, avoided in conversation, misunderstood by almost everyone, and yet undeniably necessary to the society that employed him. It is an odd contradiction, but history is full of contradictions. His profession shaped every part of his life. Merchants might hesitate before serving him. Parents might quietly discourage their children from becoming friends with his own. Invitations to weddings or celebrations were probably uncommon. Many respectable citizens preferred to pretend he hardly existed until the day they required his services. Then, once the work was complete, they returned to pretending he belonged somewhere else. Humans have always possessed a remarkable talent for depending on people they would rather avoid. That uncomfortable habit stretches comfortably across centuries, and yet, despite everything, he was still simply a man. He returned home to the same worries everyone else carried. A roof that occasionally leaked during heavy rain, bills to pay, even if medieval bills looked rather different from ours. Children who needed food, clothing, and guidance. A wife who managed the household while understanding better than anyone else the strange position their family occupied within society. When the day's work ended, his responsibilities did not disappear. They merely changed into quieter ones. Perhaps after supper, he sharpened a knife used for preparing food instead of one carried to the scaffold. Perhaps he repaired a loose chair or stacked firewood beside the house before darkness settled completely. Maybe he spoke with his children about ordinary things, weather, chores, or tomorrow's work. These moments rarely appear in history books because they are not dramatic enough, yet they made up the overwhelming majority of his life. Like almost everyone throughout history, he spent far more time living ordinary days than extraordinary ones. As darkness spreads across the countryside, lanterns begin glowing inside nearby homes. The streets grow quieter with every passing hour. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once before settling down for the night. A watchman begins his evening patrol along the town walls, calling out the hour as he walks. Inside the executioner's home, the fire burns lower while the family prepares for sleep. Tomorrow will arrive soon enough, and medieval mornings have a habit of arriving surprisingly early. There may be no execution tomorrow. In fact, there probably won't be. Instead, the magistrates may ask him to repair equipment, remove the body of a dead animal from the roadside, supervise another legal punishment, or assist with one of the dozens of unpleasant civic duties that quietly filled his calendar. Movies rarely mention these jobs because they lack excitement. Reality, however, often prefers routine over spectacle. The executioner's career contained far more maintenance than drama, far more waiting than action, and far more ordinary labor than history usually acknowledges. That may be the greatest misunderstanding surrounding medieval executioners. Popular imagination remembers only the sword. It forgets the long hours before dawn, the careful maintenance of tools, the endless inspections, the paperwork, the waiting, and finally, the quiet walk home after everyone else has already begun telling stories about the day. His profession was built not only upon strength, but upon patience, precision, discipline, and an ability to separate personal emotion from public responsibility. Without those qualities, the work would have been impossible. Perhaps that is the strangest part of all. Not the scaffold, not the sword, not even the silent crowd gathered beneath the morning sky. The truly remarkable detail is that once everything was finished, he still had to return home. He still sat down for dinner. He still listened to the crackling fire. He still worried about tomorrow's weather and whether enough bread remained for breakfast. His extraordinary profession existed within an otherwise ordinary life, and perhaps that ordinary life mattered far more to him than the work history chose to remember. Before sunrise the following morning, church bells will ring once again. Roosters will greet another dawn with the confidence they somehow always possess. Bakers will light their ovens. Blacksmiths will return to their forges. Merchants will begin arranging their stalls. And the executioner will rise from his simple straw mattress just as he always has. He will eat another modest breakfast, inspect his tools if necessary, and begin another perfectly ordinary medieval day. Because history is rarely carried forward only by kings and queens. Sometimes it rests quietly on the shoulders of the one person everyone needed, and almost everyone wished to avoid. And with that quiet thought, our long day beside the medieval scaffold finally comes to an end. The marketplace falls silent, the town settles into sleep, and the executioner disappears into history just as quietly as he entered it, leaving behind no grand speeches, no triumphant celebrations, only the memory of a man who performed one of medieval Europe's most difficult professions with steady hands, careful preparation, and a life that, despite everything, was far more ordinary than most of us ever imagined.